U.S. Senate report on torture claims CIA far more brutal than known to American policymakers, as President Obama promised not to use those methods again. U.S. State Secretary Kerry requested from Congress an authorization for use of military force against Islamic State militants, which would not be limited to Iraq or Syria. As a day of silence declared in eastern Ukraine, President Petro Poroshenko claims the country will not surrender its core ideals. And at least 10 people were killed and 34 wounded in the Philippines after a terror attack targeted a commuter bus. Good morning, I'm Shachar Peled. You're watching i24 News. In a tantalizing U.S. Senate report finding, the CIA is said to be far more brutal and misled American policymakers in regards of its methods. The intelligence security agency's torture techniques are deemed by the Senate as ineffective. i24 News' Shai Ben-Ari has more.
The U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee finally published a controversial report Tuesday concerning the CIA interrogation methods which were used in the years following the 9/11 terrorist attacks and authorized by the administration of former President George W. Bush. The Intelligence Committee stated in its report that the CIA routinely misled both Congress and the White House, and that interrogation methods put in place were more brutal than administration officials were led to believe. Among the methods noted in the report are waterboarding, used more often than the CIA officially claimed, sleep deprivation for as long as a week, as well as a technique known as rectal feeding or rectal hydration, described as a method of gaining total control over the detainee.
The committee found that the CIA's coercive interrogation techniques were not an effective means of acquiring accurate intelligence or gaining detainee cooperation.
The debate over this point is one of the major issues in contention between politicians and officials in Washington. In anticipation of the report's release, security arrangements were beefed up at American diplomatic institutions around the world. The timing of the release is not a coincidence. The report is seen as a major factor in the long-standing debate over the Bush administration's foreign policy. Democratic senators will lose control of the Intelligence Committee when the new Republican Senate majority convenes next month. The limits of state power in defending the nation have been hotly debated in the U.S. ever since September 11, 2001. In the immediate aftermath, former Vice President Dick Cheney told NBC's Meet the Press what he thought was needed.
We also have to work, though, sort of the dark side, if you will. It is a mean, nasty, dangerous, dirty business out there, and we have to operate in that arena. I'm convinced we can do it. We can do it successfully, but we need to make certain that we have not tied the hands, if you will, of our intelligence communities.
Current President Barack Obama has attacked the CIA's methods in the past and reiterated Tuesday that some of the actions taken were contrary to American values. The release of the report marks an important milestone, but it is doubtful that the debate will end here.
And President Barack Obama said last night the U.S. would not use the enhanced interrogation techniques described in the released Senate report.
Some of the tactics that were written about in the Senate Intelligence Report were brutal, and as I've said before, it constituted torture in my mind, and that's not who we are. And so, although I am concerned about potential ramifications overseas, and we've taken precautionary steps to try to mitigate any additional risks, I think it was important for us to release this so that we can account for it, so that people understand precisely why I banned these practices as one of the first acts I took when I came into office, and hopefully make sure that we don't make those mistakes again.
And staying in the U.S., State Secretary John Kerry requested from Congress on Tuesday an authorization for use of military force against Islamic State militants, which would not be limited to Iraq or Syria. The top U.S. diplomat highlighted cooperation between the U.S. and Arab nations in carrying out a series of airstrikes on the Sunni militant group.
We don't anticipate conducting operations in countries other than Iraq or Syria. But to the extent that ISIL poses a threat to American interests and personnel in other countries, we would not want an AUMF to constrain our ability to use appropriate force against ISIL in those locations if necessary. In our view, it would be a mistake to advertise to ISIL that there are safe havens for them outside of Iraq or Syria. Now, to be clear, ISIL continues to commit serious, vicious crimes and it still controls more territory than al-Qaeda ever did. It will be years, not months, before it is defeated. We know that. But our coalition is measurably already making a difference.
And now Israel's defense minister Moshe Ya'alon told high school students in a Jewish West Bank settlement yesterday that the Obama administration, quote, won't be around forever, and that once it is gone, Israel would resume construction in the settlements. Ya'alon was responding to students' questions at a religious seminary in the Gush Etzion settlement block and said the freeze on construction in the settlements is temporary. We are now joined on the phone by our diplomatic correspondent, Tal Shalev. Tal, thank you for being with us.
Good morning.
So, again, Israel's defense minister Ya'alon creates a diplomatic controversy as he belittles Obama's administration. This is a few months after the same Ya'alon called Secretary Kerry messianic. Could there be any diplomatic repercussions to these new statements?
Well, we'll still have to wait till this evening and see if Washington reacts to this controversial statement. To say the truth, it's not such a controversial statement. Ya'alon is saying the truth, that this administration was very much against settlement expansion. The only difference is that probably the next administration will also be against settlement expansion, since it's a traditional position of the United States. But as you mentioned, this is a history of statements between Ya'alon and the U.S. You mentioned the obsessive and messianic comments that were leaked to the press, but also a few months after that, he had a very harsh criticism towards Obama's policy in the Middle East, also leaked to the press. But Ya'alon has already been paid back by the administration. In his last visit to Washington, almost no senior American official met with him besides the Minister of Defense, then Minister of Defense Chuck Hagel. So it'll be interesting to see if the Obama administration will react to this evening, or again, because of the elections, understand that this is not the time to create another public rift with Israel, and that on the contrary, any public rift or any attack on Ya'alon will actually contribute to his strengthness and not actually influence him here in Israel in the political system.
Yes, Tal Shalev, thank you very much for this report. Now to Ukraine. Following the announcement of a day of silence in eastern Ukraine, President Petro Poroshenko claims the country will not surrender its core ideals. This comes as Ukrainian troops and Russian-backed separatists largely suspended hostilities in East Ukraine on Tuesday, raising hopes of a lasting peaceful settlement in a conflict that has raged for 7 months and claimed thousands of lives. Here's more from our i24 news reporter, Danny Swibel.
Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko says the ceasefire along the front lines in the east of his country appears to be holding after Kiev declared a day of silence in its war with pro-Russian separatists.
1.5 hours. We don't have, until now, no one shelter. We don't have any more killed soldiers. And I cross my fingers. And I pray that this ceasefire, if they kept and open the door for the dialogue.
Speaking to reporters afterwards, he expressed dissatisfaction at the postponement of peace talks planned for Tuesday in Minsk between Ukraine and pro-Russian rebels, along with Russian and European envoys. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov welcomed on Tuesday an announcement by Kiev that it had suspended combat operations against pro-Russian rebels.
We have hopes for the ceasefire announced today. It is not the first such announcement, but this current step was very well prepared. There were talks between representatives of the sides of the conflict, and Russian officers were helping with it under a request from President Poroshenko.
Poroshenko said the talks must be held urgently in order to secure the release of 684 hostages held by the rebels. His pro-Western leadership urgently needs calm in the east so it can focus on long-delayed economic reforms to dig the country out of effective bankruptcy and open the way for more global aid.
And that's all for now. Please join us again in 20 minutes. I'm Shachar Peled. Thank you very much for watching.